Okay. Well, it's been a while since the last time I read the last chapter, and I remember I said something about Enki and his family ties, but I can't quite recall what it was. I just thought of it as I was reading last time. I came across a YouTube channel that has some videos up on the topic, and she had said some things, although I don't agree with her ultimate conclusion. She said some things that got me thinking that perhaps Enki and Enlil might actually be simply the deification of Shem and Ham, even though I've always said that the deification of Ham in Babylon became Shamash, the sun god. She was adamant that there was no concept of monotheism during that time in history. I'm not sure I agree. However, she does have interesting ideas, interesting insight. She is much more concerned with the actual history of things than just the fantastical sort of uh, ancient aliens concept. Although for some reason she does pronounce a few of the names strangely, such as Enki, which she pronounces as Anki, but that would be an entirely different word. Enki means Lord of the Earth. Anki would be heaven and earth. An is heaven. So Anki, like the Duran key, the bond between heaven and earth. She actually said something I never heard before, was that Marduk um, was actually the person or the being that controlled this bond between heaven and earth. She said on his, basically what would be his breastplate. I immediately thought of the Levites when she said that. She was saying Abraham, if he existed, having come from a Babylonian city, would have been a polytheist. Yes, but he went back to the Melchizedek. The Melchizedek was the priest of God, the one God. The whole concept I'm beginning to her whole deal is that Marduk is the god of the Old Testament, and that may well be true. The god of the Old Testament may be Marduk, but my theory is that it was usurped. You have the original Melchizedek lineage, which was that of the white race, starting with Adam, the first white person that God made. And so you have the god of the Melchizedek, who's basically the god of the white race. In Sitchin's narrative, he has these two brothers basically fighting over control of the planet. He has Enki making mankind first, but he makes the black race. He never actually states that specifically. He kind of wants to avoid racism, I imagine. But that's what he's talking about when he makes humanity 200,000 years ago, which is when black people are supposed to have arrived in Africa. He has them mining for gold in Africa. It is the black race. There is no white race 200,000 years ago. However, then he has kingship being lowered from heaven. He has at a time later on when they stop being complete slaves and they start being given positions of power, and you have the idea of kingship emerge, which actually are just middlemen for the gods. And you have the idea of priests coming in and a social order, a social structure, and cities take form. and that kind of thing. That's much later. My theory would be that's when the white people showed up and you start having an actual structure for human civilization emerge. And this would have been Atlantis, and the Melchizedeks would have been these names that are given in Genesis before the flood were the original Melchizedeks. Sitchin compares them to other lists of kings before the flood, and so on and so forth. These would have been the Melchizedeks at that time. Anyway, there's many different ways of looking at it. She did correctly identify Marduk as Jupiter. She also identified Nibiru as Jupiter, and he has in his cosmology the planet Marduk coming in and smashing into Tiamat, creating Earth. That's his cosmogony, basically. Now, of course, this Marduk is then, after that, it's always referred to as Nibiru, planet of the crossing. But in the actual cosmology, it's referred to as Marduk. He has Jupiter being listed as Kishar. I've heard other people say that Marduk was actually Jupiter, and Nibiru actually was Jupiter, and I tend to, I'm beginning to agree with that analogy. Anyway, chapter 5, when kingship was lowered from heaven. Cities, urban centers of population, are a hallmark of advanced civilization. The Sumerian tablet that relates the tale of the first 5 cities on Earth is thus the record of the start of advanced civilization on Earth. Cities imply specialization between farming and industry, have buildings and streets and marketplaces, develop commerce and trade, entail transportation and communications, needs record keeping, reading, writing, and arithmetic. They also require an organized society and laws, have an administrative hierarchy, appoint or anoint a chief executive. In Sumer, and thereafter virtually everywhere else, that was a Lugal, literally big man, rendered king in translation. The Sumerians denoted these elements of advanced knowledge and the sum total of civilization in the term Nam Lugala, the term usually translated kingship. And kingship, the Sumerians asserted, was brought down to earth from the heavens. Held to be a divine institution, kingship required that the king, to be legitimate, had to be chosen or actually anointed by the gods. Accordingly, throughout the ancient world, the succession of kings was meticulously recorded in king lists. In Egypt, as we have seen, they were arranged by dynasties. In Babylonia and Assyria, in Elam and Hatti, and Persia and beyond. And in the Bible, with its 2 Book of Kings, or Books of Kings, it's actually just one book in Hebrew. The king list named successive rulers, giving their lengths of reigns, and occasionally a brief biographical note. In Sumer, where kings ruled in numerous city-states, the main list was arranged by the royal cities that served as the land's central or national capital at any given time, a function that rotated from one major city to another. In Sumer's most famous and best preserved king list, it begins with the statement, "When kingship was brought down from heaven," a statement that matches the opening verses of the tale of the pre-diluvial cities of the gods that we have just quoted. After the blank of kingship was brought down from heaven, after the lofty crown and throne of kingship were lowered from heaven. Those assertions, it should be clear, were not meant just to enshrine kingship with divine status, a fundamental tenet of Sumerian history and teachings was that kingship was actually, and not just figuratively, brought down to earth from the heavens, that the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, which he always sort of twists these translations of his to better fit his narrative. I forget the actual translation of the Anunnaki, but I believe I said it in the previous video. Something about lofty places, or like it's the equivalent of the Hebrew Elohim, is what it is. And people try to make the Elohim equivalent to the Anunnaki, and they think the Anunnaki are the gods. But the Anunnaki is basically just a council of high estates. It's like a senate or something like that. House of Lords, something like that. It's the Congress of the day. That's how I take it to be. It's the royal attendance, although that's not probably the best word to use. It's the court. People in the court of the time. I mean, even the word Elohim itself, later on in Hebrew times, was used for magistrates and kings and things like that. Anyway, the Anunnaki actually began their civilized presence on Earth in 5 settlements, as stated in Tablet CBS 10673. Though the name of the god who made the grants is missing in that tablet, one can say with certainty that it was Enlil, who followed Enki in coming to Earth, a detail recognized by the statement that the first of these cities, Eridu, to the leader Nudimmud, equaling Enki, was given. Furthermore, each one of the others who were granted a city, Nugig, which is the moon, or Sin, Nanar, Pabilsog, Ninurta, Utu, or Shamash, and Sud, Demetic, or Ninmah, was not just a high-ranking member of the Sumerian pantheon, but was related to Enlil. It was after Enlil's arrival that Enki's initial outpost, Eridu, was expanded to 5 and then 8 full-fledged settlements. The connection between those first cities of the gods, and the bringing down of civilization to Earth from the heavens is restated in several other Sumerian documents dealing with pre-diluvial events. 2 of the key documents can be seen by anyone who visits the Ashmolean Museum of Art and Archaeology in Oxford, England, a museum that traces its beginnings to the donation in 1683 by Elias Ashmole of 12 cartloads of antiquarian collectibles that the official history of the museum describes as Noah's Ark of rarities. The original collection diversified and grew over the centuries to become an official institution of the University of Oxford. Throngs do not wait in line to enter it. It has no Mona Lisa to attract multitudes or movie makers. But among the objects it houses are 2 priceless archaeological finds of utmost importance to the history of mankind and our planet, and both record the deluge, alias Noah's flood. They, or copies of them, in all probability served as a source for the writings of Berosus. Catalogued as WB62 and WB444 by Stephen Langdon, an Oxford edition of cuneiform text, 1923, the two clay Sumerian artifacts belong to the private collection that Herbert Weld Blundell, an English journalist, explorer, and archaeologist, donated to the museum in 1923. WB444 is the better known of the two, for while WB62 looks like the usual kind of clay tablet, WB444 is a rare, remarkable, and beautifully four-sided prism of faked clay, known as the Sumerian King List. It details how Sumer's capital was first in the city of Kish, then moved to Uruk, then to Ur, changed to Awan, returned to Kish, transferred to Kamazi, returned to Uruk, and then to Ur, and so on, ending in the city called Isin. The last entry dates the document to a king named Utu-Hagel, who reigned in Uruk circa 2120 BC, more than 4,100 years ago. But those kings, the prism's text clearly states, began to reign only after the deluge, when kingship was lowered again from heaven. The initial portion of the prism lists kings in 5 pre-diluvial cities of the gods, assigning to each ruler lengths of reigns that baffle scholars. This is what it says. Nam Lugal Anta Ade Abba, when kingship was lowered from heaven. Eridaki Nam Lugala, and Eridu was kingship. Eridaki Alulam Lugal, and Eridu Alulam was king. Mu, 28,800, Ea, 28,800 years he reigned. Alogar Mu, 36,000, Ea. Alogar, 36,000 years reigned. Two Lugal, 2 kings. Mubi, 64,800, Eba. At 64,800 years reigned. And continued in translation only. Eridu was dropped. Kingship to Bad Tabira was carried. In Bad Tabira, Enme-In-Lu Ana reigned 43,200 years. Enme-In-Galana reigned 28,800 years. Dumuzi, a shepherd, reigned 36,000 years. 3 kings reigned its 108,000 years. Bad Tabira was dropped. Kingship to Larak was carried. In Larak, Insi-Paziana reigned 28,800 years. 1 king reigned is 28,800 years. Larak was dropped. Kingship to Sipar was carried. In Sipar, Enme Indurana became king and reigned for 21,000 years. 1 king reigned its 21,000 years. Sipar was dropped. Its kingship to Shuruppak was carried. In Shuruppak, Ubar Tutu became king and reigned its 18,600 years. 5 cities were they. 8 kings reigned 241,200 years. The flood swept thereover. After the flood had swept thereover, when kingship was lowered again from heaven, the kingship was in Kish, etc. This usual rendering of WB 444's first lines is misleading in one key respect. In its original clay document, the numbers of the lengths of reign are given in star units, using the numeral sign for 3600. Alulam's reign in Eridu is not stated as 2,800 years, but 8 shars. Alagar's reign was not 36,000 years, but 10 shars, and so on down the list of the pre-diluvial rulers. The shar unit in this prism are the very sorrows of Berosus. Significantly, the shar unit of reign applied only to the pre-diluvial rulers of the cities of the gods The unit of count changes to regular numbers in the post-alluvial part of the document. No less significant is the fact that this list of rulers names the very same first 5 cities in the exact same order as does tablet CBS 10-673. But rather than naming the gods whose cult center each city was, WB 444 lists the kings administrators of each such cities. As a major study by William W. Hallow, The Antediluvial Cities, has established, both documents record a canonical tradition regarding the start of civilization, or kingship, on Earth, beginning in Eridu and ending in Shuruppak at the deluge time. One cannot fail to note that WB 444 does not mention the hero of the deluge, Ziusudra. Among the 8 kings it names, embracing the cities and reigns from the start of Eridu to the diluvial finale in Shuruppak, its list ends with Ubar-Tutu and not with Ziusudra. But as Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh clearly stated, the hero of the deluge, Utnapishtim, or Ziusudra, was the last ruler of Shuruppak, and he was the son and successor of Ubar-Tutu. Various discoveries of other complete or fragmented similar tablets, such as UC-BC 9-1819, NI 8195, and Baghdad 63095, leave no doubt that a canonized text from which copies and copies of copies were made did exist in regard to the pre-diluvial cities of the gods and their rulers. And in the course of such copying, errors and omissions took place. One such little-known tablet is kept in a private collection in the Karpalis Manuscript Library Museum in Santa Barbara, California. It too names 8 kings in 5 cities, but its different reign lengths add up to 10 great shars, plus 1 shar, plus 600 times 5, which equals only 22,600 years. 222,600 years. The glaring omissions of Ziusudra are corrected in another tablet, British Museum K11624, called by some scholars the Dynastic Chronicle. It lists 9 kings in the first 5 cities, again with somewhat different shar numbers: Alolam 10, Alagar 3, which is 10,800 instead of 28,000, and so on, but correctly ending up with 2 kings in Shuruppak, Ubar-Tutu with 8 shars, and Ziusudra with 18 shars. That's kind of a long reign to have omitted by accident. 64,000 years, 800. This tablet adds, after the total of 5 cities and 9 kings, 98 shars, 352,800 years. A brief explanation for the deluge: Enlil took a dislike to mankind. The clamor they made kept him sleepless. The tablet that gives the most accurate list of 10 rulers, matching the Berosus list, is the Ashmolean Museum's tablet WB62. Its shar units for the pre-diluvial list parallel the Saros units of Berosus, though at different individual reign periods. It differs from WB 444 in listing not 5 but 6 cities, adding the city of Larsa, and with it 2 rulers, to the pre-diluvial list, resulting in the full 10 rulers, and ending correctly with Ziusudra at the time of the deluge. A comparison of WB62 with the Greek fragments of Berosus, converting Saros to numbers of years, points strongly to this version as his principal source. Alulim, 67,200 years for the Sumerian list. Berosus has Alaros at 36,000 years. Then Alagar at 72,000 years. Berosus has Alaparos, 10,800 years. Sumerian Enkidu, 72,000 years. Berosus Amalon, 46,800 years. Sumerian, the fragment missing, ending with Alima, has 21,600 years. Berosus Ammonon, 43,200 years. Sumerian, then Dumazi, 28,800 years. Berosus Megaloros, 64,800 years. Sumerian Enmenluwana, 21,600 years. Berosus Dianos, 36,000 years. Sumerian Insipziana, 36,000 years. Berosus Eudoricus, 64,800 years. Sumerian Enmidurana, 72,000 years. Berosus Memsinos, 36,000 years. Sumerian Sukerlon, 28,800 years. Berosus Obartes or Ardates, 28,800 years. And then Sumerian Ziasudra, 36,000. And Berosus Xisuthros, 64,000 years. With the Sumerian adding up, all 10 of them at 456,000 years, and Berosus has the 10 at exactly 120 shars, equaling 432,000 years. Which of the various tablets that we have reviewed is the most accurate? The one that ends in Shirabak and includes Ziasudra and his father/predecessor is plausibly the most reliable. With them, the list has 10 pre-diluvial rulers and 6 cities of the gods. The Bible, too, lists 10 pre-diluvial patriarchs, though all were descendants of Adam through his grandson Enosh, Hebrew for human, and not considered gods. The fact that they numbered 10, and that the hero of the deluge, Noah, was, like Ziasudra the 10th, adds support to the 10 rulers' count as the correct one. Despite the varying individual reign lengths, the various tablets unanimously agree that those successive rulers reigned from when kingship was brought down from heaven. I don't know why he does this, but in all of his previous books he always said kingship was lowered from heaven. In this particular book, his last book, he changed it to kingship was brought down from heaven, until the deluge swept thereover. Assuming that Berosus had reported the most reliable version, we also end up with his total of 120 shars, equaling 432,000 years, as the correct combined total of the pre-diluvial reigns. The time that had passed from when kingship was lowered from heaven until the deluge. Thus, if we could determine when the deluge had occurred, we would obtain the date when the Anunnaki had arrived on Earth. But the number 120 appears in the biblical preamble to the tale of the deluge, Genesis 6:3, might thus be more than a coincidence. The usual explanation that it represents the limit on human longevity set by God at the time of the deluge is a dubious explanation in view of the fact that the Bible itself reports right thereafter that Shem, the eldest son of Noah, lived after the deluge to the age of 600 years. His son Arpachshad to 438, then Shelach to 433, and so on in descending longevity to 205 years for Terah, the father of Abraham, and Abraham himself lived to the age of 175. Moreover, a careful reading of the Hebrew shows that Genesis 6:3 states, and his years were 120. Were, not will be, and his can be understood as referring to the deity's count in Shar years of his own presence on earth from arrival to the deluge. In earthly years, that would be 432,000, 120 times 3,600. A statement matching the 10 kings, 120 shars of Berosus and the Sumerian king list. Such a recollection of a pre-diluvial era of the gods can explain the fact that the number 432,000 has been associated with divine duration in varied cultures, well beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia. He referred to them as being human, the 10 human rulers. which would be the Melchizedek. That's a list of Melchizedeks. Nobody ever says that, and that's what it is. And the Melchizedeks were the original leaders. They were the rulers, and they would not be deified by their own descendants. They would be deified by the pagans. That they are deified humans. They are pre-diluvial, or should we say, Atlantean kings. Okay. Wasn't Atlantis supposed to have been ruled by the 10 kings as well, you know? So it kind of fits the whole idea of the Atlantis and all of that. So, and then of course Atlantis being flooded, Noah surviving the flood, or actually Atlantis said having sunk, and Noah surviving the flood. Anyway, I have begun to believe that Atlantis may actually have been the Mediterranean islands, uh, such as Sardinia, Corsica, Malta, and perhaps Sicily as well. This was the Atlantean world. It wasn't just one place, one island, one continent out there. I mean, if it was a continent, for crying out loud, they would have more to say about it than it had one city. You know, Atlantis was actually the city, and it was on this landmass. I say the landmass was most likely an island in the Mediterranean. Crete had an ancient civilization with monolithic structures, but there are also monolithic structures on Malta, and they are now finding monolithic structures and tombs of giants and things on Sardinia and Corsica. And they should be on Sicily as well. This would have been the Mediterranean world was Atlantis. And I would pretty much, I would say these giants are always white. You're not going to find black giants. I don't believe you're going to. Because they were made to be a slave race. And the God of the white race did not make us to be slaves. We were made slaves later. That's the fall of man. So we were physically reduced, genetically altered. And he starts going into the calendrical count here. It forms, for example, the number 432,000. For example, forms the core of Hindu tradition about the ages or yugas of Earth, mankind and the gods, a Keter yuga, or a great yuga, of 4,320,000 years, was divided into 4 yugas whose diminishing lengths were expressions of 432,000 years. The golden fourfold age is 432,000 times 4, the threefold age of knowledge, the twofold age of sacrifice, and finally our present era, the age of discord, which would be the past 432,000 years. According to the Egyptian priest Manetho, the duration of the world was 2,160,000 years. That equals 5 eras of 432,000, or 500 shars, each shar being 3,600. The day of the Lord Brahma of 4,320,000,000 years equaled 1,000 great yugas, reminding one of the biblical statement, at least to Sitchin, in Psalms 90, verse 4, that in the eyes of God, 1,000 years are just as one day. In Hamlet's Mill, 1977, Professors Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschend cite additional instances of 432,000, serving as the point where myth and science join. Modern scientific discoveries that have been presented in detail in Genesis Revisited and Divine Encounters have led me to conclude that the Great Flood was a huge tidal wave that was caused by the slippage of the ice sheet off Antarctica, which I have always found to be. That's why I don't like his first book, because it's ridiculous. They have the whole, basically the first book, The 12th Planet, is all about him retelling the Enuma Elish in such a way that it fits his cosmology. It's all about Nibiru, and like I said, it's smashing into Tiamat and creating the Earth and the asteroid belt, even though somehow Earth still somehow forms into a sphere anyway. After having been smashed, he says, in half, basically. He does say that it was basically gouged. In his cosmology, the asteroid belt was gouged out of the Earth, creating the Pacific Ocean as Nibiru/Marduk came by and slammed into the side of Tiamat, or the original Earth, and that our moon, which he says was Kingu, was one of Marduk's original moons, or Nibiru's original moons, and that it got stuck with the gravitational pull of the Earth and stayed with Earth. The elimination of that ice box I have suggested caused the abrupt end of the last ice age circa 13,000 years ago. Something tells me that's not entirely accurate, but we shall proceed. The continent of Antarctica was discovered only in AD 1820, yet it was already shown on the AD 1513 map of the Turkish admiral Piri Reis. Which is, I believe, a bit redundant, because the word race, or reis, is actually the Turkish word for admiral. As described in Divine Encounters, the slippage also explains the puzzle of the other prediscovery Mappus Mundi, such as the 1531 Orontius Phineas map that shows Antarctica as though seen from the air and ice-free. The contours of the Antarctican continent under the ice cover were determined by radar and other modern means only in 1958. The abrupt end of the last ice age has been the subject of numerous studies, including an intensive investigation during the 1958 International Geophysical Year. The studies confirm both the abruptness and timing, about 13,000 years ago, of the ice age's ending in Antarctica, but left unexplained the reasons for the phenomenon. Additional recent studies support those conclusions. A study of ancient temperatures in February of 2009, or published in 2009, determined that while warming at the end of the last ice age was relatively gradual in Greenland and the North Atlantic, it was rapid and abrupt in Antarctica, or South Atlantic, about 13,000 years ago. Another study of ancient sea levels, published in February of 2009, confirming that Antarctica's ice sheet collapsed abruptly, concluded that due to the topography of the continent and its surrounding seabeds, the tidal wave was at least 3 times higher than hitherto calculated, reaching its maximum impact some 2,000 miles away. The diagram accompanying the article shows the area of maximal tidal impact stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea, as tidal, in fact. Right. And northeast therefrom, the very lands of the Bible, all the way to Mount Ararat. Right. A deluge dates circa 13,000 years ago at about 10,950 BC, also dovetails with statements in cuneiform text that the deluge occurred in the age of the lion. That zodiacal age indeed began circa 11,000 BC. Adding 432,000 to 13,000, we can thus confidently say that kingship was brought down to earth from the heavens some 445,000 years ago. It was then that astronauts from another planet, whom the Sumerians called Anunnaki, arrived at Earth. They were the biblical Anakim, the Nephilim of Genesis 6. Actually, they're not the Nephilim because it calls the Nephilim, and it calls the Anakim the Anakim. The Anakim were the sons of Anak. You have other giants as well, the Gibborim and the Rephaim and so on and so forth. The Nephilim were just the sons of these gods. You can pick out the word Anakim if you want. Everyone says Anunnaki. I'm fairly certain the word should be pronounced Anunnaki because they were the Anunna gods. And they attach ki to the end of it. It's just the word earth. I suppose because some of them were on the earth and other ones were in the underworld, which is actually the heavens. Anyway, there are certainly parts of his narrative that I disagree with. I just don't buy this whole Antarctica thing. The various lists of pre-diluvial rulers unanimously agree that Eridu was the first city on Earth. The name Eridu literally meant house in the faraway built. Don't know why people won't say just house built far away. It is a word that has taken root in many languages throughout the ages to denote the Earth itself. Earth is called Erde in German, from Erda, Old High German, Jord in Icelandic, Jord in Danish, or I guess it's Jorth in Icelandic, and Jord in Danish, Eartha in Gothic, Eartha in Middle English. It was called Eretz in Aramaic or Ertz in Kurdish. Today it's Eretz in Hebrew. It is also important to remember that the various lists of the reigns and the initial cities of the gods are lists of their successive chief officers, and not the names of the gods to whom these cities were granted as cult centers. All the lists agree that Alulim and Ologar were the first rulers of the first city, Eridu. But as is clearly stated in tablet CBS 10673, Eridu was forever granted to Nudimmud, an epithet of Enki that meant he who fashions artifacts. It remained his cult center forever, no matter who was the chief administrator or king there. Likewise, Sippar forever remained the cult center of the god Utu, better known by his Akkadian name Shamash. Shuruppak was always linked to the Sud, or medic, who was an Inkarsag, and so on. Various texts link the establishment of Eridu to the arrival of the Anunnaki on Earth when kingship was lowered from heaven. Just as NASA's first astronauts splashed down in the ocean in their command modules before landing facilities for spacecraft were developed, so did the first group of Anunnaki who came to Earth. They splashed down in the lower sea or Persian Gulf and dressed in wetsuits resembling fishmen They waded ashore to establish a home away from home, Eridu, at the edge of the marshlands, a delta formed by the twin-like Tigris and Euphrates rivers as they flow into the Gulf. That first group numbered 50. Their leader, all the texts agree, was Enki, or Ea, he whose abode is water. The prototype Aquarius, Oannes, had arrived on Earth. Several Sumerian texts deal with and describe the first arrival. One titled by scholars The Myth of Enki and the Earth, Enki and the World Order, or Enki and the Land's Order. Contains an actual autobiographical account of Enki. The long text, restored from tablets and fragments scattered between two museums, includes the following first-person statements by him. I am the leader of the Anunnaki, engineered by fecund seed, the firstborn son of divine Anu, the big brother of all the gods. He dumbs it down and he says big brother instead of elder brother. When I approached from heaven, bountiful rains poured down from the sky. When I approached earth, there was high tide. When I approached its green meadows, heaps and mounds were piled up at my command. One of the first tasks was to establish a command post, a headquarter house. It was built at the edge of reed-growing marshes. I built my abode in a clean place. I called it by a good name. It's good fortune to portend. Its shade stretches over the snake marsh. Then there are some blanks, some spaces in the next line. Some of the oldest cylinder seals illustrating Sumer's earliest times depict reed huts of the kind that the Anunnaki could have erected from the readily available reeds at the edge of the marshes. They all depict inexplicable antenna-like devices protruding from the roofs of those reed huts. His outpost needed to be built on an artificial mound raised higher than the level of the river and marsh waters. Enki assigned the task to one of his lieutenants named Enkimdu. After he had cast his eye on the spot, Enki raised it above the Euphrates. Enkimdu, the one of ditch and dike, Enki placed in charge of ditch and dike. Enki, the text continues, then gathered his lieutenants at his command post. They included the weapons, carrying something or other, it's a blank spot, the chief pilots and chief of supplies, the lady of grinding and milling, and the blank who purifies the water. Besides shelter, nourishment had to be found, and the marshes offered an ample fresh supply. The carpfish waved their tails among the reeds, the birds chirped to me from their blank. Enki wrote. Subsequent sections of the text, written in the third person, record Enki's orders to his lieutenants. In the marshland, he marked out a place of carp and fish. In Bilulu, inspector of canals, he placed in charge of the marshlands. He marked out a cane brake. In it, he placed reeds and green reeds and marked out the cane thicket. He issued an order to something. Him who set up nets so no fish escape, whose trap no blank escapes, whose snare no bird escapes. The son of a god who loves fish, blank, Enki placed in charge of fish and birds. The location of these activities is indicated by several references to the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, where they come close to each other. close enough for Enki to make the two meet and cause their pure waters to eat together. Several additional sections of the text deal with water-related activities. Following the arrival, Enki himself is credited with waterworks affecting the two rivers, and other lieutenants are named for water-related tasks. He filled the Tigris with sparkling water in order to make the Tigris and Euphrates eat together. Enki, Lord of the Deep Waters, placed Imbelulu, the inspector of canals, in charge thereof, but breaks in the tablets or use of undeciphered terminology leave the nature of some water-related operations uncertain. These include a seawater assignment to a female lieutenant whose epithet name, Nin Sarara, Lady of Bright Metal, suggests duties linked to precious metals. Again, you have the black race first, and you have the white race made by Yahweh, the creator of the white race. Well, presumably, depending on how you want to look at it, Yahweh would have had to have made them both, right? But the black race is never, it's not spoken of their creation. It's spoken of the creation of the white race, because when he creates Adam, there's already another set of people in existence. In the Hebrew, it says that there are two types of Adam. There is the Adam that he made when it's talking about him making Adam, and he called their name Adam. But then there's also the Eta Adam, which is the race that's already there. That's distinguished. There's two separate types. And that's where Cain went off and said when he went to build a city, that's where he went. He went to where they were, those people were. And he married in with them. And it's like when he goes to the land of Nod, and takes himself a wife and makes a city. Where is he going? He's going to Sumer. He's going to Sumer. And he builds a city. I believe he called it says he called the city's name Enoch, if I recall correctly, after his son or grandson or something. And Sitchin actually in Book 4, The Lost Realms, says that Tenochtitlan was the city of Enoch that Cain built, because he takes out the actual phonetic values of Enoch from Tenach. It's the city of Tenach. Titlan means, that was the Aztec or Mayan for the word city. So Tenochtitlan is the city of Tenach. And he says that's the city of Enoch. And that's the city that Cain built. But that's not true. Cain would be this Enki character, and he's going off and he's building this. He's building these establishments here in Eridu. That would have been the city that Cain built. And this would have been way back, like 4000 BC or something. 3800 BC, whatever the hell it was. I know that the calendar, the Nippur calendar, or the Babylonian calendar, goes back to 3760 BC. So that would be about that. That's the founding of the city of Nippur. So if this is the first city, actually, I believe what was the city? It was in the last chapter I was reading where it said it actually went back to 5000 BC. Anyway, it's back there, and these cities go back, like Jericho itself. Jericho goes back 8,000 years. It's a very ancient city. And then you have these new places like Göbekli Tepe, which is way back before even the flood is supposed to have happened. When those of us that say it happened 10,000 BC or 10,500 BC, Göbekli Tepe is potentially even older than that. So it was there even before the flood, which would have been Atlantean. Anything before then is Atlantean, like Pumapunku. Although I attribute that to be what I've always called the draconian race. I may have to reevaluate that because uh, there's just no record of there being any reptilian. You don't have any reptilian skeletons anywhere. Not even any. You don't even have stories for reptilian skeletons, much less actual, authentic history of it. You don't even have stories in the wind about finding them. You have stories about finding giants and things like that. You have all kinds of stories that you hear, but I've never heard anyone telling a story about finding reptilian bones. And if it was even remotely true, there would have been stories about it. So I'm having to rethink the idea of the Atlantean race being. My initial thought was that the Atlantean race was the demons or the so-called fallen angels, and that they were the reptiles. That's what I was thinking, 10 years ago. But I'm having to, ever since he started showing me what is in essence Anglo-Israelism, which now they call it Christian identity, which he started showing to me in 2014 about the white race. I'm beginning to believe that the white race is actually the Atlantean race, and that's the giants. And these guys nowadays, they're saying that the giants are the demons and the Nephilim and all this stuff, and that everything is actually. I am coming to the realization that everything is actually reversed of what we are being told that it is, even by these guys, these Christian guys, that are always talking about the Nephilim and stuff. I'm coming to realize the Bible is basically backwards. It's the mirror image of what it should be, because it's written by basically a priesthood that usurped the Melchizedek priesthood, and they just kind of elevated themselves to that position after Egypt, when apparently the Melchizedek lineage was lost. It's either the Davidic kingship lineage, the lineage of David from Adam, or it just got freaking lost altogether. But if you say that, then it brings into question the genealogy of Christ. There's a whole lot to it. But anyway. And of course, when they were in Egypt, they were the Hyksos anyway. I'm getting far afield here. I need to get back to the book. Other unexpected references to metals, more specifically to gold, are also made in a section dealing with Enki's post-arrival waterborne inspection of his watery wonderland. He toured the surroundings in a rowboat whose commander held a rod for detecting or measuring gold. In his hand, his epithet name, Nimgir Sig, meant chief determinator. Chief determiner of luster. He has a title. The guy that sights the gold in the water, looking for sparkly stuff in the water, has the title, chief determiner of luster. Like you need a title for that. Depictions on early cylinder seals show Enki in a reed boat. They're depicting this to be a god. This is like the god. He's supposedly like 500,000 years old, and they've got him sitting here in a reed boat with water pouring off of him. I mean, all right. You understand he's always shown like all this water pouring off of him, or actually more like shooting off of him. Really, you understand that? Like if he's coming out of the water and all of this water's pouring out of all their equipment and stuff, you can kind of understand that. But not after he's already been established and he's sitting here building crap, and he's got like his little horned helmet, his crown on with the horns, showing his authority, his power. And I mean, obviously, this is a guy. He's setting himself as a king. The word king comes from the word Cain. Okay. Also, the word gene from the Greek. Uh, it's pronounced as K in the Greek for your genealogy. That goes back to Cain as well. I'm saying this Enki dude is most likely the biblical Cain, and it just makes the most sense to me, even though that conflicts with certain stories and certain genealogies of the gods. Um, but it just makes the most sense. Although he is equivalent in the pantheons to the Egyptian god. Um, well, I want to say Thoth, but actually it's Ningishzida that is the direct equivalent to Thoth. I was going to say that even so, Enki is basically the god of the magicians, not Ningishzida, as was Thoth to the Egyptians. And Enki is basically playing the role of the developer god Ta, or Ptah. And that would be there again, commensurate to Cain going off and building a city. He's not building the city himself. He's organizing these teams of people to do it. I branched off from my original thought. What I was going to say is that he's a son of Adam. He's a white individual, and he's a giant. Okay, and he goes down to where these indigenous people are, and he basically takes over command and starts getting them, organizing them together to do these building projects, these constructs. That's why they deify these people, these antediluvian characters, as gods. Not only are they giant, but they're also white. And you go over to all the places in the New World, whether it's the Incas, Easter Islands, the Mayas, the Aztec, they all talk about their gods being white, which is why when the Spaniards came over at the beginning of the when they came over to conquer the Aztecs and the Mayans, they thought they were gods. They actually gave them all their friggin' gold because they thought they were the gods because their prophecies told them the gods would return. They don't want to tell you that because it's racist to say it. But it's just like when the British came down into Africa, they actually played the role of the gods, and the black people fucking let them play that role. That's what they thought. Even when like up in like into World War I and World War II. World War II is going on, and they're flying freaking planes over the South Pacific over these islands, and they'll crash a damn plane or something, and the indigenous inhabitants of the island will think that they are gods flying around in these planes. Say what you want, but you don't see freaking islands of white people that are still running around in loincloths and thinking people are gods. You don't see white people deifying people. You know what I mean? You don't see that. Where the hell are the islands of white people that are like living in mud huts. You don't have them. There are no islands of white people living in mud huts. Because we build the damn cities, like this guy's doing here. I mean, that's maybe racist, but it's the way it fucking is. Anyway. He's not going to be like they are, or they're not going to deify him. He has to be able to command them and gain their respect and obedience, which means he has to have that commanding presence, and it helps you if you're twice as tall as they are. And you're not going to be able to even devise all of this crap yourself, as it is all being attributed to him and the others of his ilk, the other gods with him. They're going to have the mental capacity to do this stuff themselves, to rationalize it and come up with the plan that apparently didn't exist before. They're doing things that had not been done in that area. Those people had never thought of this stuff before. And these gods are coming in. It's obviously they're not gods. They're not coming in from another planet. They're obviously people, another people coming in from another part of Earth. And they're taking over. And you're not going to do that. People aren't just going to let you fucking come in and take over their area, their land, if you don't have some kind of obvious superiority to you. That's why they became the gods. They deified them. All over the planet, you have these same stories. People showing up out of nowhere. Usually they're denoted as being white, and they have some kind of strange technology, this or that. They can do crazy things that the inhabitants can't do. They can fly. They have ships. They have technology. They build structures. They do all these kinds of things. They show up and then they leave, and they leave promise of their return, but they never come back. And entire mythologies and religions are built up around them. Even the Mayans, when they had their celestial cross, when the Spaniards came with the white sails, they had the red cross on the sails, and the Mayans, the indigenous people, equated that with their own mythology of the celestial cross and the return of their gods, who, like I said, happened to be white. And most likely gave them their damn calendar. Sitchin in Book 5 says that Enki, I keep confusing the two, Ningizida went over to them. Enki, well, he says Enki carried them over there. The original inhabitants of Mesoamerica came from Africa. There obviously were black people, was the original inhabitants there. He said he carried them over at one point from Africa. He took a contingency of them, moved them over there to Middle America. And that then he says the god Ningizida is equivalent to Thoth and Quetzalcoatl, and that he's the one that gave them their calendar, the Zulkan and the Hav, and the 52-year cycle. It is one of the most complex calendars ever devised, because it's a correlation of two simultaneous calendars running side by side, and each day in the whole 52-year cycle had its own name, its own individual name. That's how precise it was. Anyway, out there again, I'm getting off topic here. But it caught me when he's talking about the reed boats, and I'm like, what is this god? He's some kind of a god. He's been around forever, flying in spaceships, and well, Sitchin always says rocket ships. If they're spaceships, they're not going to be rocket. They're UFOs. You can't tell me they're using rocket ships. but he didn't want to say UFOs, so he made it rocket ships. And it just tells you what his mindset was, because he didn't force their translation to say the UFOs, the flying saucers, the discs. He made the translations say rockets. He took the word for knife um, and made it into a rocket instead of taking some kind of word and making it into a UFO, which is what obviously UFOs were getting big at the time. Science fiction was all about UFOs and stuff and space travel. But he has these gods that have been around forever. I mean, they're ruling over planets for tens of thousands of years, and he has them using rockets like we were doing in the '60s. To me, that's ridiculous, and it just throws out his whole freaking argument. That alone throws out his argument because you can tell it's bogus. Because everybody knows you can't use rockets to fly between stars and planets and stuff. It takes too long. So they're going to be using some other kind of propulsion, i.e., regular UFOs that people had already become accustomed to at the time. So when I started reading his books, especially number one, and he's talking about rocket ships over and over, rocket ship, rocket ship, rocket ship, and he's never mentioned UFOs one time. He's obviously trying to avoid that phrase, even though it's actually much more feasible to actually say that than rocket ships, especially if these guys live so long. Anyway, it's just funny. They've got technology enough to fly between planets, but they don't have enough to make a damn boat. And he's floating here in a reed boat. Anyhow, I digress. So the boat is equipped at both ends with poles to which are attached circular devices akin to those that are placed on top of the reed huts. What do all these tidbits of information mean? It behooves us to ask at this point a key question regarding the Anunnakis coming to Earth. Was it accidental? Were they traveling in a spacecraft and, due to a mishap, looked for some solid ground to land on in an emergency and found the speck of firm ground called Earth? There's so much wrong with that sentence. Were they perhaps explorers roaming space for pleasure or research, who saw, as Enki described, a watery, verdant place and stopped by to take a look? In such circumstances, the visit to our planet would have been a one-time event, but the overwhelming ancient evidence indicates that the visit lasted an incredibly long time, that it entailed permanent settlements, that the Anunnaki kept coming and going, and that even when a calamity, the deluge, destroyed everything, they stayed on and started all over. That's because they had no place else to go. The Earth was their planet, their place of origin. This is a pattern of planned colonization for a purpose. Enki and his crew of 50 had come to Earth, I have suggested, for the purpose of obtaining gold. I just had the thought that these Anunnaki, he's saying 50 here initially, there were actually, I believe elsewhere it says 7 initial Anunnaki, which would be the 7 planets, which are the fallen stars or fallen angels. Could it be that the fallen angels could be this contingency of Enki / Cain that broke away from the Adamic lineage and because of the service to Yahweh, as Cain killed Abel because God chose him to be the Melchizedek by accepting his sacrifice. Cain offered a sacrifice, God rejected it. Cain then killed Abel, and Cain became an outcast because of it. So he goes off to another land, a distant land from the general region of Canaan or Phoenicia, where the original Adamic race was. And so Cain goes off and follows the Euphrates River down to the land of Sumer and builds this city of Eridu, where he finds these people living there and he has them build the city. And basically just becomes their king, basically. Anyway, could that not be the origin of the idea of these fallen angels, or those who defected from the regular angels or sons of God. If the white race or the Adamic race, the Melchizedeks, were the sons of God, could not these Anunnaki then be the fallen angels themselves, so-called? Again, I don't really believe in angels, but I believe in the idea of what has become known as demons or fallen angels. Those beings do exist, but they're not fallen angels because there are no angels. I have not seen any evidence of any actual angels, certainly not any that can reproduce with humans. Of course, the whole idea of that is just genetic manipulation, which you don't need to reproduce to do. Enki and his crew of 50 had come to Earth, I have suggested, for the purpose of obtaining gold. Well, that sounds a bit going to a different planet for gold is a bit far-fetched, but going to a different land for gold farther down the river is not that far-fetched. That purpose emerges, and the tidbits of information begin to make sense if treated as dots to be connected to what follows. The plan was to extract the gold from the waters of the Persian Gulf. But when this did not work, a change to deep mining had to be undertaken. In the second phase of the Anunnaki's activities on Earth, other gods arrived. Leading them was Enlil, lord of the Command, for whom a new city of the gods, Nippur, was established. Like I said, 3760 BC, basically. But he's saying it was, you know, what, 400,000 years ago? Its heart was a command and communications hub where orbits controlling tablets of destinies spun and hummed in the Dur-An-Ki, the bond between heaven and earth, or Holy of Holies. He's saying, in his model, the Dur-An-Ki is a space station of some kind, and the tables of destiny were like computers inside this space station. Like I said at the beginning, she said that Marduk, later on, when Marduk was around, when he came around, he carried the tables of destiny on his person, which reminded me so closely. She said on his chest, which reminded me almost exactly of the breastplate of the Levitical priests would have the stones on their chest. And it was said, or it is said, that Lucifer used to have those stones. Well, it doesn't say. I heard stones or jewels, gems on his in his wings. That's a bit far-fetched as well. What if, as soon as I heard that, I associated that Lucifer with the stones and the stones with the priest? That meant to me God gave us, the priests, what once had been Lucifer's. But then again, like I said, he showed me that there are no fallen angels. Lucifer was at one time a priest of his race. So of course he had control, he had command over the covenant at that time. That's strange. I don't remember him saying that the tablets of destiny were in a space station. The way I remember it, it was in the ziggurats, in the Ace of Gil, that kind of place. The houses of the holy. while Enlil took charge of the Aden, or Eden, with its settlements. I just said houses of the holy. That's what Aden means, house of the lofty ones, where the name Eden comes from, houses of the holy. Which I always say that it's house of the holy. I think it's the Led Zeppelin tape, houses of the holy. I always say it that way because of that. So Enlil took charge of the Aden with its settlements, each with distinct functions. Enki's tasks shifted to a new location called the Abzu. It is a term commonly translated as the deep, but which literally read means place of the shining metal. Of course, he always has to retranslate the words to fit his scenario better. So when you translate it properly, it really means this: places of shining metal. In the 12th planet, I have suggested that the meaning of this combination of two syllables that in Sumerian could be read in reverse, Zu-ab, without changing its connotation, has been retained in Hebrew as Za'ab, or gold. So Abzu, or Zu-ab, thus meant the place from whose depths the shining metal, gold, was obtained. The depth connotation indicating that the gold was obtained by mining. The Abzu, according to all relevant Sumerian texts, was located in a distant region called Ar-Raliz, the place of the shining lodes by the water. Funny how you have 2 or 3 syllables and it gets a whole sentence out of the meaning. In the lower world, the place of the shining lodes by the water in the lower world, right? It is a geographic term that applied in varied texts, including some dealings with the deluge, to South Africa. Ar-Rali, I wrote, was in southeastern Africa, a gold mining region to this day. The changes that accompanied the second phase activities of the Anunnaki involved more than a shift from an attempt to easily extract gold from seawater to the need of obtaining it by arduous deep mining. It also involved a change in mission policies, a change of commanders, and the unintended transfer to Earth of personal rivalries and clan clashes from the Anunnaki's home planet Nibiru to planet Earth. Varied texts, among them the Atrahasis epic, detailed the tale of the ensuing events. They were, as we shall see, the forerunners of the creation of man, the explanation for the circumstances of the deluge, and the key to unlocking the enigmas of the demigods. The arrival, as described in Enki's autobiographical text, was not the beginning of the chain of momentous events. For the real beginning, we have to start with the tale of creation itself, just as the people of Mesopotamia had done each new year time. We have to read, reread, and understand the Mesopotamian Enuma Elish and the biblical tale of Genesis. Now see, here he jumps ahead millennia, all the way down to the Babylonian Empire with, like Nebuchadnezzar and things like that. That's when they would read the Enuma Elish. I'm not sure. I need to look up on Wiki when the Enuma Elish was actually first theorized to have first been written, but I dare say it wasn't 4000 BC or anywhere close to when these cities were being built for the first time. Well, actually, I know that because she was using the Enuma Elish in that video that I was watching earlier, and she was talking about Marduk. Her whole thing was about Marduk being the god of the Old Testament, and although it's not the god, it wasn't originally the god of those people, but by the time that the Old Testament had been written by the Levites, the priests and rabbis, after they went to Babylon in captivity for 70 years, they were raised in Babylon in the rabbinical schools because you didn't have a place to be a priest anymore. They didn't have a temple. You had no the priests had no occupation. They were out of a job. It was their entire caste, their entire family history and lineage had been brought to an end by their deportation to Babylon. So they ended up becoming rabbis, and they instituted the rabbinical schools, or um, the synagogues, and that's why you have synagogues, is because they would build those in each of the cities, and then they started compiling text and writing text and rewriting it, revising it, writing their history, compiling their history, and they came up with basically the Tanakh. And the whole thing has to be overlaid with Babylonianism. And so she's comparing all of these texts and the references to Yahweh to Babylonian references to Marduk. And she's using the Enuma Elish to describe Marduk. And it is all about him. And his basically it's his creation epic. And so you don't even have Marduk on the scene yet. Marduk is the son of Enki. So yeah. He's saying we have to go back to Sumer for the original texts to get an idea of the gods, but then he says, oh, well, to get an idea of the gods, we have to go back further in time in the chronology, and to do that, we have to go forward in actual history to when they developed their cosmology in Babylon, long after Sumer had actually fallen to Assyria and Akkad and Babylonia. By the time you get down to Babylonia, you're 3,000 years later, and they developed this Enuma Elish belief system about Marduk after he became the prime god, took the 50 names. And so what I'm saying is it's circular logic, because it's saying we have to go back to look at what the Sumerians said, but to give them veracity, we have to go forward to what the Babylonians said. So basically, the Sumerian gods, he is saying, came from the Babylonian planet of Nibiru, which may or may not have even been developed at the time that these Sumerian gods were said to have been active. There again, they were deified, and over time the cosmology and mythology grew and was added to, so that by the time the Babylonians came around to write the Enuma Elish, you had all this creative mythology of Marduk slamming into Tiamat, destroying the dragon. Actually, he destroyed her with the 7 winds. She's a dragon. He says it's the earth, and she destroyed. Marduk destroyed Tiamat with 7 winds. I knew it was with wind. I didn't know it was 7. But that's of course the 7 planets, 7 orbits. Of what would be the Anunnaki, the fallen angels, because it was the fixed stars were said to be the attendants of God, right, around the throne of God, which is the center that it spun around. The angels were the stars or the constellations, and the planets were the fallen stars or the fallen angels. Anyway, the precise information they provide not only explains many of the phenomena, he's talking about the Enuma Elish, the precise information it provides not only explains many of the phenomena in our solar system and beyond, it sheds light on the origins of life and on who we are and how we came to be here on planet Earth. Now, of course, also he's saying this is not only from the Babylonians, but it's supposed to shed light on the older Sumerians, even though they didn't write the text. It is still supposed to be taken from the gods at face value, even though these gods, if they are the ones I'm saying they are, would not be ones to be trusted anyway. You have to consider the source. And that's the end of the chapter. There's a section here between the chapters. Abode of gold and flowing waters. The Abzu, a Sumerian text stated, was in the Utu, in the west of Sumer, as southeast Southeast Africa is west of Sumer. Yeah, it's west by 500 miles and it's south by 5,000. So I think south wins out. Reachable by seafaring boats that traverse the distant seas, its Arali, its mining zone, was reported in one text to have been 120 beru of waters away from the quay on the Euphrates, a distance of traveling 120 double hours, 10 days of traveling by sea. The mined ores were transported to the Aden by cargo ships called Magar Urnu Abzu, ship of ore of the lower world, for smelting, refining, and formation into portable ingots called Zag, purified precious. A Sumerian hymn in praise of the Abzu describes the place where Enki established his new headquarters as one with water rapids or great waterfalls. To thee, Abzu, pure land, where great waters rapidly flow, to the abode of flowing waters, the Lord Enki betook himself. The abode of flowing waters, Enki among the pure waters established, in the midst of the Abzu, a great sanctuary he established. Sumerian Akkadian syllabary stated that Abzu equaling Nikbu, or equaled Nikbu, a deep and tunneled mine. The initial pictogram for Abzu, from which its cuneiform sign evolved, represented a mining shaft, variants of which stood for gold and other mined minerals, including precious stones. And he shows the various pictographs there. Once the gold was obtained from the Abzu and the operation was in full swing, Enki's autobiographical text extolled the region as Maluka, black land of large trees. Maluka, he has translated as black land of large trees whose laden boats transport gold and silver. That whole thing is in quotes. Later Assyrian inscriptions identified Maluka as Cush, land of the dark-skinned people, meaning Ethiopia or Nubia. The syllabic components of the Sumerian term convey the meaning fish-filled waters. He's talking about the three-syllable word Maluka. Also contains the meaning fish-filled waters. The term may thus explain cylinder-sealed depictions of fish-filled waters flowing from Enki, who is flanked by workers holding typical gold ingots. These ingots, or whatever they are that they are holding, are on staves, and they're cylindrical in form. But here we have Enki sitting down, water pouring off of him, with fish as well, even though the fish are going up. The fish are going up the water that's pouring off of him. And he's sitting down, and he's still slightly taller than they are around him standing up. So like I said, he's a giant, and but he's got the moon and the star here, and that's going to be that's Venus and the crescent moon, which is still the symbol of Islam today. It goes, but the god of Islam is Marduk, and his father was Enki. Anyway, I'm not so sure these pikes, they look like spears with something attached to the top. He's saying that's gold ingots. Also, it has the rings. They have rings on them that Ishtar and other gods are depicted as holding the rings in their hands, and they have these rings on them that are not like attached, but they're there. They're sort of sticking off of the stabs or pikes. But he's saying it's gold ingots. I'm not really seeing ingots in this. But anyway, that's the end of that chapter. And so I guess I will cut it off here as part 2. And I will talk to you later. Until then, take it easy.